Hey everybody, welcome back to Leading Thriving Cities. This is our new show where we want to shine a spotlight on leadership in public service and have deep conversations about how we create a sustainable future for our cities. My name is Chad Wright. I'm the founder of Forward Partners, and I'm joined today by Chase Stapp. He spent over 30 years in public service, making it all the way to the rank of police chief before moving into the assistant city manager's office. We have some really good conversations about what that transition is like and what surprised him about that. He's now retired from the city of San Marcos, and he has some words of wisdom for folks that are still in public service. What has he learned after he has transitioned out of it? It's such a deep conversation. I know you're going to find so much value for it. Thank you for joining us on Leading Thriving Cities. All right, Chase, thanks for joining us on Leading Thriving Cities. We are so excited to have you. So you spent over 30 years in public service, and you're still in many ways in public service. You were everything from law enforcement all the way to assistant city manager's office. And you were just telling me you got your start at 19 as a dispatcher?
That's right. Police dispatcher with the Hays County Sheriff's Office, yeah.
Was this something that law enforcement was always something that was on your mind that you wanted to do, and that was your path in?
You know, I wouldn't say always. I grew up in a law enforcement family. My dad was career law enforcement.
Okay.
That's pretty much all I can remember him doing. But for the first probably 15, 16 years of my life,
Yeah.
I thought that's absolutely not what I'm going to do.
From watching your dad?
From watching my dad go through that profession. He didn't get paid anything back then.
Yeah.
He worked a lot of night shifts. So I just had some predisposition against the profession, I guess.
Yeah.
But there came a time when I just had that revelation that that's what I was meant to do. And that's what I was going to do. And it treated me very well for
I'm curious, when you had that revelation, was your dad on board for that? Because one thing I hear from officers a lot these days is, this is such a hard job, I don't ever want my kids doing it.
Oh, yeah, that's tough. No, he was on board. I think he was always very supportive and always showed a lot of pride in the progress that I made in my profession. But I went through that as well as a father. My older son got into law enforcement.
Okay.
And my wife and I were supportive.
Yeah.
But it took me to a place where I kind of figured I knew where my dad was, because it was tough watching him go into that career field. Now, he got out of it after about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And he's doing great in the private sector, but yeah, we went through that as well.
It's one of those moments where you're really proud, but you also fully understand the meat grinder he's about to get thrown into.
Yeah, and there's a bit of guilt that you feel when you feel that way, when there's a little bit of regret that your son wants to follow in your footsteps and enter the profession, because I think he was very well suited for the job. He's the kind of cop we need today.
Yes.
So I felt a little guilty about thinking, man, I wish he wouldn't do it, because it is a meat grinder. It's a tough profession to get into these days, but he did well for the time he was in it. Yeah.
Well, part of the reason we even have this show is we really want to start some broader conversations about what we need to change in public service to make it sustainable. Mm-hmm. And part of that is understanding how much of the meat grinder of law enforcement is just the nature of what you do on the street, and how much of it is internally the cultures we create, and what can we adjust there. And so I'm curious, because you finished your career as a police chief, and then you transitioned into assistant city management. Mm-hmm. In those realms there, what's one thing you really wish people understood about those roles and maybe some of the difficulties of them?
You know, I think one of the things that I always struggled with my entire career, and in some ways it may have gotten worse, is what I call this attribution phenomenon, where people attribute certain things to you because they think that's how you feel, or those are your motivations. Yeah. My experience has been that people who want to serve, whether it be in police work, fire service, EMS, or city management, really public service in general, they do so because they want to serve their community, make their community a better place, whether it be a safer place, whatever. They have really good reasons for wanting to seek those career paths. But some of the harshest critics want to attribute so many other bad things.
Yes.
It's about power. It's about corruption. It's about, you name it.
Yes.
Insert bad word here.
Yes.
That's not been my experience.
Yeah.
It's really not.
It's interesting you say that, because when I got into public service, because you do hear a lot in the political environment about power and about public servants and why you do the things you do. ultimately what's interesting is I have encountered over and over and over again people with that heart for service, people that love what they do and they love their communities and they love serving. And that generation is almost, I think about the next generation coming up and the finding the ones that have that same heart, that truly do want to serve. I think that's something we've got to be very intentional about when we talk about creating these cultures, creating a culture that is something that is appealing to them. Yeah. Because our generations were, you just put your head down and you do the work. You just run through the wall as hard as you can, Yeah. And we're really good at it. And ultimately, it doesn't go particularly well for us when we do it over and over again. So I think there's some things to learn from the next generation. But we've got to understand they're not looking for the same thing. They want to serve, they want to make a difference, but they want a different environment. Yeah. And so it's going to be interesting watching public service, which typically shifts very slowly, start to make that shift a little bit. That's going to be, I think, challenging for a lot of people.
It is, but I'm starting to see those shifts happen. Those changes are happening because the work environment that we see now in public service, you name the department, doesn't matter, is much different than when I started. Yeah. And so you're right, we do change in public safety and public service pretty slow. That's one of the things I think we need to do better at. But we're getting there.
How do we do that? Because it's what you're talking about is we need to be more open to ideas. We need to be more creative, more nimble. Yeah. But we get very stuck in our ways. There's the old saying, what do police hate? The way things are and change. Yeah. And so which I've discovered to be very, very true. How do we start to think and be a little more flexible?
Well, for one thing, I think all of our leaders need to be equipped in managing change and trained to deal with change management. Yeah. There's plenty of training. I know you work in that space some. Yeah. So there's that, but I think we also need to be looking to the private sector a little more. Yes. To see what can we do to make our workplaces more employer friendly, less rigid, more adaptable, a little more flexible and agile so that we can change it a little better.
The entire reason we are sitting here having this conversation today is because a patrol lieutenant came to one of my presentations and wanted to bring some business leadership into a police department. Yeah. And now here we are 6-7 years later having this conversation because of that one incident, that one event in my life. That's really funny.
I mean, there are some departments, and I'm not even picking on the city that I spent my entire career at, because you pick a city and this is going to be true, but there are departments where everybody starts to know that's where good ideas go to die. We've got to change that. Yes. I mean, those departments, and I'm not going to name them because they exist in all cities, and it's just sort of the nature of how they've become. It's kind of a self-preservation model, I think, that maybe creates some of that. Those departments have got to figure out a better way. We've got to be more agile. We've got to be able to shift and adopt change more quickly.
Because I think there's ultimately, if you're in a department that does not change, that is not open to new ideas, you're going to lose your best people. Your best people are going to go to a place that is open to it, and you're going to be stuck with the ones that are not the best. And
particularly the best new people, I think, right? The best new people, Yeah, if they come into an organization and pretty quickly see that their ideas don't contribute to any meaningful change, then they won't stay.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So over the course of your career, obviously from dispatcher to police officer, all the way up to police chief to assistant city manager, you had to overcome a lot internally with yourself on that journey. What were some of the things you had to wrestle with and really overcome internally to be able to get where you did?
Gosh, I think a lot of it is when I started my career, I was pretty idealistic in my thinking about particularly police officers in general, and put all police officers on a pedestal, and everybody, they all were just without fault. I had to learn pretty quickly that police officers are human beings, and they make mistakes just like everyone else. Yeah. And I think if our community looks at police officers the way I did, that kind of sets us up for failure. Yeah. They should be looked at and placed at a level of higher expectations, I think. That's legitimate and that's expected. But not so much that they can't live up to that. They're human. Yeah. They're going to make mistakes. In fact, we encourage mistakes to be made as long as they're with good intent. Yeah. So I had to deal with that, I think. And then also just, every time I promoted, my perspective changed. It broadened somewhat. Yeah. The worldview changed. And particularly when I got to the level of assistant city manager, because when you're working as a department head, police chief in my case,
Yeah.
you really start to think I've got this all figured out, and then you go into the ACM role and you realize I might have had that part somewhat figured out, but the rest of this I didn't.
It's such a broader world, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because when you think about it in the police world, every sergeant knows exactly what the lieutenants are doing wrong and how they need to be better. They know everything about how to do the lieutenant's job until they become a lieutenant, and they're like, "Holy crap! I had no idea."
And that's the struggle: is the more your vision does sort of open up and your perspective changes, you just wish you could impart that on the people that are working for you.
Yes.
And it's hard sometimes because if they're not living it, they're not seeing it.
Well, because as police chief in San Marcos, you had roughly how many under your care?
About 150 people all total.
So you're running a 150-person organization. That's a large organization, multi-million-dollar budget every year.
Yeah.
It is probably pretty easy to feel like, I got this figured out.
Yeah.
And then you get to ACM and you're like, oh my gosh, now I have multiple departments that are like this.
Absolutely.
And it's a lot. There's a learning curve there. What was one of the hardest things about that transition? Because I know we have a lot of people watching that are in that police chief role, and it's becoming very common for police chiefs to transition into city management.
Yeah, it is becoming more common. In fact, I think it makes a lot of sense for police chiefs to make that transition. I had at the time I transitioned into city management, I guess I had about 23 years or so of service in San Marcos, all total, and about 5 as chief. And I really thought I would retire from there as a police chief. But then you start to think, kind of what's next. And I started looking at that. There were some folks in the city manager's office that I knew were going to retire probably before I would.
Yeah.
And things just sort of played out that way. Okay. And so I really do encourage police chiefs, fire chiefs even, that are thinking about what's next to give it a look. Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. Public safety chiefs have to make a lot of difficult decisions. Yeah. That impact a lot of people. Yeah. And they typically manage pretty significant budgets. And so I think that skill set, it moves well to assistant city manager role.
What were some new things you had to learn when you transitioned into that role?
Well, for one thing, I needed to know how those other departments that were going to be in my area worked. I needed to know about animal services and code compliance and the fire department. I needed to know about the city marshal's office and our court. You name it, those other departments that I'd only worked with sort of casually, I needed to really understand them deeply. And so I spent time working in those departments, did some ride-alongs, and just really spent more time in those departments than in the police department.
Interesting.
To learn those.
And it really is a time investment, right? It's I'm going to build these relationships and build your knowledge base all at the same time.
That's right. You mentioned relationships. I mean, that was key. I knew the folks, but to build that kind of relationship to where we were going to be working really closely together, that takes the effort that you have to put into it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's very helpful. And I think it's, when you think about transitioning from level to level, that's really true of almost every level, right? You get up to that lieutenant level, suddenly you're probably supervising departments you've never supervised before. You get up to that commander level, now you're supervising much bigger parts of the department. And so with each one, it's establishing those relationships and really building those up over time. Yeah. No, that's a good investment. I like that. Very cool. What's so when you think about, we talked about the newer generation coming up, and I think it's a generation that really does want to serve. Given all your experience, if you had to go back and give advice to some of them that are thinking about coming into public service, what advice would you give them to get them started?
I would encourage them, because we need people that want to serve and want to do the job for the right reasons. So I would encourage them, number one, because as we've already said, it's a difficult time to get into the law enforcement profession. So number one, encourage them. Number two, I would just tell them to keep their nose clean, work hard. But also, as they enter the field, I would encourage them to never doubt what their potential might be. When I started as a police officer in 1992, I never dreamed I'd be a police chief. Okay. That was not an aspiration of mine. Yeah. It wasn't an aspiration of mine, and probably until I made the rank of commander. And even early on, as a commander, I didn't think that's what I wanted to do. Yeah. And so I would tell people getting into the profession, never sell yourself short. Always have an eye for the future and plan for what that eventuality might be. Because, decisions you make today, even mistakes you make today, can really impact that.
Well, even relationships. I've had conversations with people that have promoted to those higher levels and said, I wasn't as cognizant early on about the relational side.
Mm-hmm.
So they would step on people in order to elevate, but then eventually you elevate enough, those people still remember.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're not necessarily celebrating if you get to those top levels. And so, but that's a thing that like early on you have to start being cognizant of like, yeah, I'm in a squad with these folks, but really these folks might be people I'm leading later.
Oh, absolutely.
And I don't know that young people think about that quite as much.
Yeah, one of my big things, when I promoted within San Marcos to where I really had an influence and impact on
Mm-hmm.
people to that levels was we treat people with dignity and respect all the time.
Yeah.
And really that at the time that my focus was external in terms of how we treat the public, but really as I think back on that, it's internal as well.
Yeah.
Because if you're leading people, if you're not treating them with dignity and respect, how do you think they're treating people that they're encountering on the street? And so if you do that throughout your entire career, you'll build a reputation by building strong and healthy relationships with people that then you end up promoting over some of those folks that they won't mind working for you.
Yeah. I was having a conversation one day. We were talking about the idea that you really want people to cheer when you get promoted.
Yes.
And the fact is they're going to or not going to based on what they've experienced with you. I had a sergeant that wanted to be a lieutenant, and he, for better or worse, I said, look, we were having to have a hard conversation. I said, I want you to be honest with me. Would people cheer if you were selected tomorrow for lieutenant? And he thought about it for a minute. He went, no, I don't think they would. I was like, then there's more work to be done.
It's a great question to ask him.
Well, there's more work to be done at sergeant to fix that, right?
Yeah.
You want them to be excited and cheer when you make it up. And if they wouldn't, then there's a relational problem there. And everything is those relationships.
Yeah.
So you recently retired from the city of San Marcos. You're now working with TML.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, through that retirement, we talked before off mic about the clarity you gain from just transitioning into a new season.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of people in city management that have not retired.
Yeah.
What have you learned in that process that you would go back and say, hey, assistant city managers, police chiefs, here's something you really need to be thinking about right now that would be so helpful that you're probably not going to see until you retire, but it will help you right now in terms of the rhythms and the stress and the things you deal with in that world?
Yeah, and I think some of them do this much better than others, but I guess I'll think about my comments in terms of the ones that probably aren't doing it that well. It's it's a lot of self-care.
Yes.
Responsiveness is something that I've always valued, and so generally if you needed something from me, if you texted me, you sent me an email, it didn't matter if it was late at night unless I was asleep or whatever, you got something back from me pretty quickly.
Yes.
And I just always valued responsiveness. And what I found is most people in city government are that way, particularly city administration.
Yes.
I think they've just learned that that's what people expect, particularly if you're working for elected officials and things like that. And so you get to a place to where, it never stops.
Yeah.
Let's just face it, city government, it just never stops.
When your entire job is dealing with giant problems in municipalities, you're never going to be done.
Yeah, it never stops. And so you set yourself up to be in a position to where you can literally work all the time.
Yeah.
Weekends, nights, because technology's got us in a place to where you can basically be working all the time. And that's pretty much where I was. And I think a lot of people in city government are that way. And I can say that with confidence because I still interact with them. And I think back when interacting with them back then, I didn't think twice about emailing my city manager at 9:30 at night because there was an idea. And guess what? She'd reply.
Yes. Yeah.
And thinking back on that, we need to do better because while that's great in some ways, there's really no expectation for that.
Yeah.
And it creates a situation where you really aren't disconnecting enough.
Yeah.
Even like going on vacation, we had this conversation all the time. If you don't at least maintain your email traffic while you're on vacation, let's say you're gone a week. They're in a city that's as fast-paced as the one I worked for, you'd probably have between 700 and 1,000 emails when you got back if you just didn't touch them.
Yeah.
And so people say, well, why do you look at email when you're on vacation? Because for me, it was I could relax a little better if I knew I wouldn't have that mountain when I got back. Different strokes for different folks, but
I'm curious how much on vacation did processing that email as you went also then create distractions while on vacation.
It did.
Because some of those emails, it's not like you're processing 700 very benign emails. It's like, oh, here's a problem, and I feel the need to deal with it.
Yeah. The problem with it is, I think I would set out with the mindset of I'm just going to basically take care of the easy ones so they're not piling up while I'm
Right.
gone. The problem with that is you get working through, and then boom, there's the big issue.
Yes.
And now you're thinking, well, I got to deal with that now because I just can't let it go.
And the big issue has gravity, and part of it is
Yeah.
there's also this internal pull of, but yeah, I get to show up and I get to solve this problem while I'm on vacation, so I'm going to look even better. Like there's a darkness to it that we don't always acknowledge that does exist.
Yeah.
That it's like I'm providing value, therefore I have value. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from, is that ability to turn that off and go, hey, my highest value right now is demonstrating to my team how we do this well.
Absolutely. Lead by example, and I didn't always do that in that way. So that would be something I would say to people still in the field is when I stepped away, it took me all of 3 or 4 days to realize, wow, I mean, I was really up to here in it.
How often were you still like just reaching for your phone constantly?
Well, that's what I mean. It took a solid week before I could set the phone down and walk away and not even think about it, because in my new job, they do a much better they do a much better job of, I mean, at night, next to no work-related traffic. On the weekends, nothing. Now, it's a different environment. I'll give them that. But they also seem to understand that.
Yes.
And so after about a week, I mean, I could set the phone down and go into another room for an hour, and it didn't feel weird.
Yes.
And that's just, it was crazy to think about. That's how plugged in I was, and I felt like I had to be. And I'm not alone in that. I'm pretty certain that
you're not.
Most
I
of the
think that's why I
coworkers
have
are.
a job, is because you're not alone
right.
in that.
I mean,
I think that it's interesting too, where it almost has to be, for one person to fight that fight, it's a losing battle.
yeah,
For an assistant city manager to go, hey, city manager, hey, council, hey, everybody I lead, you're not going to hear from me at night. You're not going to hear from me on weekends unless it's a true emergency.
yeah,
That's really hard to do.
Yeah.
It almost takes a cultural shift from the city manager down, saying, hey, here, we're going to value health in the middle of this.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the categories of things that you will hear from us at night or on weekends or on vacations. Outside of those categories, you're not going to hear from us.
yeah,
And then present that to council and get their buy-in and let them know they're going to have to change their rhythms and their expectations. And that's a really hard thing. But I think the cities that have figured that out or are going to figure that out, those are the ones that are going to attract the best talent.
yeah,
The people that really have that heart to serve, but also they're not going to sacrifice their soul to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things where, you know, when I think back on some of my habits, for example, like I would email my people at night sometimes, and I would always have in the back of my mind, well, I don't expect them to read it tonight or reply tonight. No way. I would never expect that. But if they're wired the way I was, what did they do? Then they read it and they felt like they needed to do something with it.
Even if they're not wired the way you are, the others just seeing your name in their inbox cause their stress level to go up.
Yeah, and that's not fair.
And you could be the best leader in the world. Like I used to do that, and I would literally put in caps in the thing, do not read this until Monday, or do not read this until tomorrow. I'd get a reply back immediately every time. Yeah. And it's just understanding that seeing your bosses in the inbox, it just pulls you into work. There's so much gravity and expectation to it that people follow what we model, not what we say. So I can say don't read it. They're going to know that if I'm up working, they should be up working. Yeah. That has been one of the hardest ththings for us to, I think, for me to wrestle with as a leader over the years, because even as we teach this stuff, I still wrestle with it sometimes. I will occasionally, I actually sat down this weekend to do a little bit of work, and I was finally like, you know what, I'm not doing this. I need to rest. I got a crazy week coming up. But there'll be times I will do work on a weekend, and they call me on it. The Emily's sitting over here, everybody involved in our company is like, do you really need to be doing that? And every once in a while, it's okay. But if it becomes a habit, now I'm starting to cause more problems than I'm solving. Yeah. And that's the hard part for us to really understand.
Totally agree.
Well, I think that's good advice for people, still in the fight, because you're right. It is incredibly common. You don't get into the city manager's office unless you're driven. I have never met anybody at that level that was just a genuinely lazy human being. It is always very driven people that really get there. And so it's a very, very common issue. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. One of the things we're doing with this is really trying to start a broader conversation about sustainability, because the way we do things in public service is not sustainable. I think you're probably experiencing this now in your new role. In my role, I get to go amongst all types of different public service, all types of different cities. And what I find is that our society is built on the backs of a lot of really tired people and really under-resourced teams. And so we need to start rethinking things as cities to make it sustainable, or we're going to hit a really hard place where we can't get the right people to do the jobs, to just maintain basic service. What do cities need to rethink when it comes to sustainability? What are things we need to change to be able to allow our teams to truly thrive and do their best work?
Well, and just to be clear, the word sustainability can take on a lot of different meanings.
Yes.
Cities look at environmental sustainability a lot, but that's not what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
It's really how can our efforts be sustainable? How can our people come to work for us and want to be here for 30 years, right, or longer even? When I started in the law enforcement profession, it was entirely common for people's goal and for them to achieve this goal to work 31, 35 years. Now it's much more common, 20 and they're out.
Yep.
And I hate to see that because TMRS, for example, the municipal retirement system is great. It's much better at 30 than 20.
Way better at 30 than 20.
And I hate to see somebody put that much into it and then miss that last piece.
And that's on top of like all the institutional knowledge you lose when people stop at 20.
Yes, that has a price on it that you just really can't, you can't estimate.
Yeah.
But I think we've talked about some of the things a little bit already, and that's, we've got to find ways to be intentional about work-life balance. When I started, rookie cops had to work a ton of overtime, and there was plenty of it available to make ends meet. And now what you find is that officers, you can put a sign up for a shift, an available shift, and nobody will pick it sometimes, particularly an extra job outside of the department. And it's because they don't necessarily have to. We're paying them a little better. Yeah. And your old hats will say, well, man, nobody wants to work those shifts anymore. Nobody wants to pick up the overtime anymore. Well, good. Yeah. That's what I say to that is good. Yeah. I'm glad they don't. Because
when you think about it, if you take a cop who's working 70, 80 hours a week because of overtime, and you put them on the street to make critical decisions, they're going to make worse decisions if they're tired than if they're rested.
That's right.
That's just how humans work.
Yeah, and can they keep up that pace for a 30-year career? And the answer is really no. Yeah. So again, I think we look to the private sector a little bit. I mean, police officers are never going to be able to work from home. Right. They're never going to be able to, just shift and flex their hours however they want. So there's always going to be that level of rigidity to the work because we have to have coverage, clearly. But, are there other ways where we can look to the private sector and say, these are some things that we can do to make our work more sustainable. And then, and we're getting better about this, but there's got to be an enhanced focus on emotional and mental health. And you're starting to see that, and I'm really proud of that. Yeah. The focus on physical well-being wasn't even really huge until, I'm going to say 10 years ago or so. And now that's pretty much mainstream. Yeah. Just about all your progressive departments have physical well-being programs of some sort. Now you're starting to see a lot of departments also implement emotional and mental well-being programs where, for example, it goes beyond your traditional EAP programs where they contract with a person who's experienced and trained to deal with public safety professionals. They understand the challenges of that line of work, and officers or firefighters, paramedics can go straight to that person anonymously, and the department gets a bill. We did that in San Marcos, and I mean, it was great. Yeah. When you start to see officers openly in public say, hey, I did this, and it works, you need this, now you're making progress.
And that's the thing that's often missing, is the officer willing to be vulnerable enough to say, I did this. And it's funny, I was riding out one time with I think he was a sergeant or lieutenant, and we were talking about this idea, and he goes, oh man, mental health, everything. I encourage my guys, go take advantage of everything available, go do it all. And I said, out of curiosity, do they ever see you do it? And he's like, oh, I could never do that. I said, so it's good to do, but you can't. And he goes, I can't get past something inside me that just feels weak. And I said, the most valuable thing your team will ever see is for you to bleed. They need to know that it is okay to be human. It's okay to hurt and do this job. And it's funny, the more police chiefs we interview, the more we're having this conversation about, as police chief, you're 20, 30 years in this career. You've seen some stuff. You've been through some stuff. And every one of them seems to be, we've got to fix this because this is broken.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can fix this, everything else starts to fall into place.
Yeah.
Because so much of it is we see the terrible outcomes from the lack of mental health care. But just day to day, moment to moment, their attitude on the job, so much of it is tied to that. And when it's negative, it drags down every team they're connected to and starts to create bad outcomes for everybody at that point.
I mean, the rate of suicide in the police service, the rate of divorce in the police service, the average age of death after retirement, all of those metrics tell us something is wrong, something's broken. And so, the more we can focus on those things, and you're right, before we get to all those things, those are terrible, they're tragic. It's the day-to-day person that's showing up to work and what they're bringing with them that we really, it's really impacting us.
I came across a study at one point that showed that it wasn't the things y'all experienced on the street that was actually causing the high suicide rate. It was the fact that there was no place to come back to and actually deal with those things. Yeah. That there was no vulnerability. There was no ability to be honest and be human in the job. And what that led to was people going, I just got to survive 20 years. Well, the same study showed that the average years served before a police officer chose suicide was 20 years. So this is people that get to the top of the mountain and look around and go, this wasn't worth it. They were so focused on the end point, the top of the mountain, versus saying, how do we create a thing where we love every day of the climb, where we show up with a sense of purpose, we love the people we're with, we're vulnerable in the right ways. If we can create that, I think it solves most of that problem at the end.
Agreed. And it's also a balancing act, too, because you want them to feel that way about their job. You want them to want to come to work and give it all they've got and to be that connected to it. But at the same time, you don't want it to be what they are, all consuming. Yeah. And so I guess another answer to your question about sustainability is we have to encourage our employees to find outlets away from work that they can connect with, that have nothing to do with the job. Whether it's hiking or fishing or hunting.
Connecting with people outside of law enforcement. Yeah, maintaining those friendships is huge, and it's something that goes out the door immediately. And it's funny, what is the book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement? It's such a basic book, and it has such great advice, and everybody reads it and goes, that ain't going to be me. It's fine. I got this. And yet, one of the main things is you've got to maintain those relationships outside of law enforcement. And it's almost like you have to have these dividing lines, because you do. Like I think about even my team. I want all of us incredibly passionate. When we're doing the work, I want us so focused and so deeply loving of that work that we're going to do our best, right? We're going to do incredible things. But also, I don't want them even thinking about work on the weekends. And for me, it is, and this is a different case than law enforcement, but I think there's something here. I literally draw a line there where during the week, I am a student of leadership. Every moment that I'm not sitting there talking to a client or talking to my team or working, I'm listening to things, I'm reading things, I'm constantly learning new things about leadership that can help me be better. On the weekends, I listen to and consume nothing related to leadership. It is all about hobbies and things I enjoy. And there's a real line there. And it's funny how often I'll be picking a podcast to go for a walk or something. I'm like, oh, nope, it's the weekend. Not about leadership, right? But I think there is something to drawing those lines and having boundaries that is incredibly helpful, that then allows you to show up on Monday and go, all right, it's Monday again. Let's rock and roll. And that ability to disconnect is critical. And the nature of the shift work makes it hard, I think, in some cases, especially if they do pick up like overtime shift, or an extra shift, extra duty shift. I mean, because that's just time you're not disconnecting on that day. Nope.
It's very important.
No, it's not. It's really tough. In your new role, so you're working with TML, and you're working what exactly are you doing with TML?
So, an important delineation. I learned this. There's TML, the Texas Municipal League, and then there's the TML Intergovernmental Risk Pool. That's who I work for.
Okay, and based on your shirt, that's the pool you're in.
Yeah. And the risk pool essentially works in partnership with all of our member entities to provide them with their insurance coverages like workers' comp, auto liability, property liability, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm a law enforcement outreach consultant for the risk pool. So basically, my clients, if you will, the ones I need to be building and maintaining relationships with, are police chiefs across the state, which is what attracted me to this job.
Right.
I wanted to step away from the circus, if you will, of city management. but I wanted to continue to contribute, and this role is allowing me to do that.
Yeah.
I travel around the state, and I meet with police chiefs, and I help them to look at their exposures to risk and look at different ways to do their business that might expose them a little less to risk.
Yeah.
Deliver some training for them as well as needed, as it relates to reducing their risk, and it's been outstanding. It's been a great change.
I'm curious, and this will be the last question we'll finish on, but I'm really curious, how much of your time with those chiefs is, here's the box of the job I'm here to do, and how much of it is, I've walked in your shoes, do you need somebody to talk to? Like side conversations where you're just able to connect and be a resource.
It's about 50-50, and it depends on the chief. Some you find are much more open to engaging in that conversation, and then some are just pretty busy, and you got an hour or you got 30 minutes on their calendar, and that you better make the most of it. But what's interesting is I've found, so I spent the first 3 months or so onboarding, learning this new job, and they had a very structured training program for me here. I had to learn the industry, right? They knew I came in with the city management and police experience. I needed to learn the risk management industry. Very, very enlightening, very informative. But the first week, I found myself thinking, I wish I had known what I'm learning now when I was a police chief.
Okay.
And so that has given me a mission, and it helps to drive me to show chiefs, hey, these are all the resources the risk pool has available to you. Use them, because they'll help you make more informed and better decisions. And so far, every chief I've met with, you can see the eyes when I start to show them some of the things that we have available to them, and they just didn't know.
Something you mentioned there is that's your mission now, right? You have a drive to do that. We were talking earlier about police and what happens post-retirement and how the numbers are not good. I think most of it is, do they still have a mission? Do they still have a drive and an understanding that they can serve a purpose? I think that's a huge piece of it. I'm glad you've discovered yours, man. That's incredibly exciting.
It is, and really to put it in just a really small nutshell, my drive is to help chiefs succeed.
Love it.
There, because you work with a lot of them. It's a tough environment, and you see chiefs around the state. So often they'll do 2 or 3 years somewhere, and then they're just either they move on to another city or they get out or whatever. I would like to see chiefs succeed and be able to stay wherever they want to be as long as they can.
I think one of the keys to that is going to be if you're in that role, having more partners around you that understand you.
Absolutely.
Because in my role, I become a person they can talk to about anything because I understand their job and I understand leadership. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the beard, I'm easy to talk to. So we get to have a lot of deep conversations. And I realize in the middle of those what a blessing that is because they don't get to have that with a lot of people. So I think the more we can do that kind of side-by-side work of providing chiefs with resources they don't normally get, with support and with care and with just somebody to lean on, I think it makes a big difference.
Absolutely, I agree.
That is awesome, man. Thank you so much for this conversation. This has been great.
It's been my pleasure. I don't think I deserve to be here. I've seen who you've been interviewing, and you've had some heavy hitters in here, and the content's been great.
That's incredibly humble of you, but this has been a great episode, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you for joining us for Leading Thriving Cities. If you'd like to find out more about what we do at Forward Partners, you can find us at www.forwardpartners.net. We love partnering with cities to learn how to develop healthy leaders and thriving teams. We do that through a variety of means, from leadership coaching to online courses to facilitating retreats. If you ever need anything, please feel free to reach out. You can also find us online with all the different socials, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. We are putting out content all the time, and you can find it at Forward Partner.